morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 31 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios, and today I'm joined by Cloudcast veteran Mike Foley. Mike, product architect at RSA. Great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Tell us what you're doing these days. We got together at VMworld last fall. We were talking about security in a vCloud Director context. What are you doing these days?
So my role's kind of two roles. I'm working for the CTO of the technical marketing organization of RSA, and I do stuff like this. I do presentations at conferences and white papers and so forth. And then my other part of the role is on the product architecture team in being the resource for all of the RSA development teams around virtualization and coming up with new and interesting ways of not just running on top of VMware, but starting to leverage virtualization as a security tool.
Okay, cool. So you're still staying very technical. You're still involved with architecture, but you're also out evangelizing stuff, talking about it, helping people get it done. So
yeah, evangelist with dirty hands.
Yeah, excellent. So, one of the topics that came up this year when we asked folks what they wanted to hear was, talk to me about mobile devices, talk to me about where that whole space is going, whether it's mobile devices in the consumer world, or in most people's cases, they want to know for their enterprise business, their government. So I thought today we would try and do a couple of things. One, you and I are going to talk a little bit about security for virtual desktops, and we can kind of define what that means. And we're going to talk about a end user environment, how to secure that. And then the other thing we're going to do, which is going to be new for this one, is we're going to do the podcast. We're going to talk for a little while, and then we're going to do sort of the video equivalent of this. So we've always been, how do we blend good technical discussion, technical topics, but it's hard sometimes to visualize it. So we're gonna jump in front of the whiteboard. We're gonna break the video camera out. So if you're listening to this tomorrow or whenever, be sure to go to the website or go to Mike's blog. We're gonna cross-post this on like the RSA website, a couple of different places. You'll be able to see us walk through this from a whiteboard perspective as well. So hopefully you guys like both formats. Let's jump into this a little bit. Let's sort of start with a really basic concept. So when a lot of times when people talk about virtual desktops, whatever that definition means, whether it's VDI in one vendor's sense or it's a end user computing in another vendor's sense, we're talking about sort of emulating a desktop, right? And for a little while, the discussion was like, you can save money by doing this. It's easier to operate and administer. More so the discussion's coming around to maybe that's not where the cost savings are, the value is. It's really about centralizing my data, and if the data is centralized, maybe then it's more secure. Let's start there. Is that true? Is that a sort of a myth? What does that really mean if I centralize it's more secure?
Yeah, I kind of called this out in my blog article from a week or so ago, where a lot of people who started off with their VDI kick the tires projects began to realize that the cost savings weren't as easy as servers.
Right.
Where I take 100 servers, I condense that down onto 10 boxes. I've now saved 90 servers worth of electricity and AC, and the finance guy thinks I'm a hero, and everyone's wondering where the money's going and everything else. VDI is not like that at all.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about the user experience. And if the user experience is slow or perceived as slow or not working quite right or just a little bit funky, someone's going to say no. Right? And if you get enough people saying no, or one big person saying no, next thing you know, the project has failed.
Right. So to sort of fix that, we introduced these other technology. It's 10 gigabit to the server. It's caching technologies and storage or SSD and while those create the right sort of user experience, they're not cheap, right?
No.
They're far more expensive than the $50 hard disk you had in your desktop.
Right. The initial outlay starts racking up some serious cost.
Right.
Whereas with virtualization, I was saving money. The perception is with VDI, I'm spending money, and no one likes to be on that side of the fence.
Right. So the shift seems to be, okay, what's the other cost, operational cost of running a desktop? And it starts getting into things like what happens when data gets lost, what happens when people lose devices, and what happens when you have to refresh things. That's where the sort of the security, governance, overall cost savings play comes into the picture, right?
Yeah, those are the items that never really show up on a budget.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, who owns that?
Who owns that? Who owns that responsibility? Or where on the budget item did I say by adopting this new security, I hate this word, but paradigm, I'm now starting to not have to worry about bad things happening as much.
Right.
Therefore, I don't have to budget for that. Those things aren't done.
Right.
At the finance level.
Right. It's like thinking about IT insurance or something like that. It's just not on the IT guy's mind.
Or the finance guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a possibility that security, and you and I were talking about this offline. I mean, I think what you're saying is there's a possibility that security, which is typically sort of an afterthought in a lot of cases for, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, could actually be the driver for folks who feel like I need a better way to manage my end user computing environment. Is that sort of right?
Yeah. I've explained this to a number of folks at EMC who are especially on the vSpecialist team where they're talking to customers regularly about these large VDI rollouts. I talked with one last week, 8,500 users being moved into a VDI environment.
Wow.
It's just, and the numbers are not in the hundreds. They're every single deal I'm hearing is in the thousands to tens of thousands, right? And as they're going through the deal, you're hearing the mumbles of, wow, is this going to cost us some money, and so on and so forth. And for the first time, I tell them, for the first time in probably the IT security industry, looking at this from an IT security standpoint and the things that I can do with VDI could be the actual tipping point forward rather than backwards.
Right.
Traditionally, we get to a point where everyone's on board and the security guy comes in and says no, and that jinxes the whole deal, right? And he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Whereas if looked at correctly and understanding the capabilities and getting the right tools in place, it's the security guy going, why are we not moving to this?
Right. Okay. Cool. So let's spread this out a little. Let's make the picture a little bit bigger. So let's say we've got an environment that's sort of being architected for VDI, right? So you've got a set of endpoints, whatever those might be, the network in between that, the servers that are going to be hosting either a full virtual desktop or some sort of emulation of an application, right? And then the storage that sits behind that, however that's delivered. It could be a SAN, could be DAS, could be whatever, right? Lots of moving pieces there. If you're a security architect and you're looking at that, where are the the immediate red flags to look and say, I gotta address security here, I gotta address security. I mean, obviously you want to look at it holistically, but where are the 4 or 5 points in that immediately jump to mind?
Well, so from the standpoint of the virtual disk drive within the Windows 7 VM, you already have the built-in isolation at the VMware level in that my VM can't mount your disks. That's an admin type of thing, right? Yeah. So you now have that isolation. So it's not like you can walk into my cube and take physical possession of my laptop and root my laptop.
Okay.
Right? So you now no longer really have to worry about that. Where the isolation really happens is at the network level, right? So should I be talking to you? Should our VMs have any type of open network connection? So that starts going into more of a firewall type of issue or an isolation type of issue. Okay. And those are things like VMware vShield and Cisco's security gateway can really start to bring in isolation. Okay. So that if you're the server and I'm the VM, the only port that we really need to communicate over when I want to access that application is 443. Right. I can isolate you right down. So what I like to call this is that shrinking those windows of vulnerability. Okay. Right? You only need to get at what you need to get at. And this really starts boiling back into the bringing the security guy in up front. Yep. Because this is just as important from a network design standpoint, a storage design standpoint. This is now a security design standpoint. Okay. And you want to make sure that you have, if you're going to leverage these capabilities of products like vShield, you want to make sure that the network guys understand it and the security guy has the right input into how it's all architected.
Okay. So isolation sort of, or a form of isolation is probably the starting point. What do I want to talk to what? Where do I sort of want to apply policies for types of isolation, either application and let's talk a little bit more about the things beyond that. So how do I do things like essentially sort of proactive monitoring? How do I make sure that the wrong data didn't go to the wrong device? How do I track and log that if a laptop got lost that it didn't have sensitive, like how do I, what's in place?
How do I make sure sensitive data doesn't get onto the endpoint?
What's in place around the, where did data go? How do I know it's there? How do I, do auditing and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so with everything running as VMs, you now have a lot more visibility into what's going on. So with vShield, I can isolate by groups that align with business needs, not necessarily security needs, right? So I can isolate in the case of a large college campus, I can isolate faculty from students, right? Or I could isolate lab from lab. Say one lab's being funded by one company, another lab's being funded by another. They really need to be isolated. But how do I then start to figure out about visibility? Well, because I'm doing all of this stuff at the virtual layer, I can prove that my VM was not in the wrong place. I can use technologies like data loss prevention, whether it's the built-in data loss prevention from vShield, which is actually RSA's engine that's been licensed, or I could use RSA's data loss prevention or other vendors' data loss prevention. I can now start to understand what's been touched. So give me a list of all Word documents that were opened by that user. Now I can then start to say, I can limit the ability, I can do a brute force limit the ability of being able to plug in a USB stick into my virtual desktop. Or with DLP technologies, I can say only the iron key encrypted stick is allowed to be plugged into that. So I'm insured, and I have a record of all of this. I'm insured of if someone copies a very sensitive Excel spreadsheet with tens of thousands of user records onto an iron key, I can at least say I can at least prove that yes, someone copied that off of the virtual desktop onto a USB stick that was encrypted using a corporate encryption scheme.
And does that type of concept where it's like I know where data went, I sort of know who touched it, how they touched it, does that apply to even simple things like printing? I mean, can I prevent people from printing sensitive data? I mean, all those sort of things.
Sure, and I'll post a video on my blog after we've done this of this whole thing actually happening in action. And the way it would work is my data loss prevention technology will scan all these documents, and if it finds a document that contains credit card information, I can apply policies such that me in engineering, if I open this document, I'm not allowed to print it. Or I'm only allowed to print it to a printer that's in a locked room. And that's where the whole design aspect really starts to come in. You've really got to spend some time and figure out how you're going to map out all these things so you can really take advantage of them. And at the end of the day, when that laptop is stolen, I can now print out a report to the auditor that says, look, Mike's laptop was stolen. Yes, he has access to sensitive information, but nowhere in this audit trail did he ever copy that information onto his laptop. So now you have less of a worry of having to do things like encrypting laptops or even worrying about what device Mike used to log in, because you can prove that sensitive data never got onto his device. Therefore, you don't have to report it.
Gotcha. So you avoid some of these things like local disk encryption, which tends to drive people crazy. It kills performance.
Only 30% of companies use local disk encryption.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's sort of move from some of the technology. So it sounds to me like lots of ways, if it's done right, to make sure that we can secure it in terms of isolation, make sure the data goes to the right place. Let's talk about the other side of these transformations, which is not the technology, but like the people and the process. Like, give me an example. Give me both, maybe a pro and or like a good example and a bad example. You've dealt with a lot of folks who've tried to deploy virtual desktops, right? Obviously, you're talking to people.
Yep.
Security is a piece of that. Give me an example, good example, best practice of getting security involved and when, like who drove it, when it happened, and then an example of sort of bad and the output of it, like names to protect the innocent. But like people always, the question I always get from people, it's like, all right, great, I get all the technology, but like how do I drive this change? Like it seems like it's helpful, but how do I drive the change? Like what can people look for out there?
Well, EMC has taken on a very large VDI rollout.
Okay.
Right? It started with a few hundred people. I was on the list of probably the first couple of hundred, and I've been using it now for almost 2 years.
Okay, so EMC IT, the corporation,
yes.
big company, yeah. Okay,
yeah, and they see the advantage from a security standpoint.
Okay.
Around VDI. I don't have any specific stories around the things that have gone bad, but from what I've heard from people that have told me, it's been more around the end user experience that really tanks a VDI rollout, not necessarily a security thing, because the couple of hundred seat kick the tires, traditionally security's always brought in at the end.
Yeah.
Someone wakes up the security guy and says, okay, make it secure.
Yeah.
For those type of POCs, proof of concepts, security is rarely involved.
Yeah, they're typically trying to...
They're done under the radar.
They're validating cost and end user experience, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That makes sense.
So they're really done under the radar, and next thing you know, they're rolling out 8,000 seats, and then they tell the security guy, oh, we're doing this, and we need to have it up and running next quarter.
Right, and you hope the architecture they proved it on is somewhat similar, so you can insert in the right way.
You hope.
You hope.
Yeah.
Okay. So sort of last question, and then we're gonna jump over to the video or the whiteboard. So we talked a bunch about like Windows type of environments, right? Like creating a virtual desktop for Windows, but a bunch of people, the buzzword might be BYOD, bring your own device, but in essence, it's there's a lot of Apple devices, iOS devices, Android devices, or RIM devices, or what like how do those fit into this picture? Are the same tools used if I was using VMware in Windows or Citrix in Windows as I would be for an iPad?
Yeah, so if you look at, say, the two major VDI deployments are VMware View and Citrix.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's a VM running on a hypervisor.
Okay.
In both of those cases, you can gather a huge amount of information as to what's going on and what's affecting that VM and who's moving VMs and changing VMs, so on and so forth. So you can get great audit trails around that. With vShield licensing RSA's DLP engine, you can set up groups and then apply policies to the groups and therefore be able to manage things at a group level, providing consistency and easier management. I'm not familiar enough with the Citrix side to know if they have that type of capability.
Okay. So similar types of concepts. I mean, the design principles are probably very similar.
They're very, very similar, and you can apply a lot of the same technologies, whether it's a DLP running at the hypervisor level or a DLP running as an agent within the VM. You can do combinations thereof.
Okay.
For the end user device, the BYOD device, the bring your own device to work, we're sitting here. We both have MacBook Airs. We both have iPhones.
Right.
We probably own them. EMC doesn't.
Right. We're breaking all sorts of rules. Yeah.
Actually, EMC IT is okay with it.
Okay. Cool.
Right. But for the typical IT guy, they're looking. They look, and I had a great Twitter go around about 2 hours before I got here. About this, trying to convince this particular guy that he's thinking of it using old school.
Okay.
Rather than secure the endpoint and move up, is secure the interface, secure the virtual machine,
the source,
and ensure the data doesn't go down.
Okay.
Right? And so really what you're getting at the end of the day, for those guys who were around in the 80s and 90s, is a glorified X Windows terminal.
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
And it's your Mac or your iPhone or Android device really become nothing more than a display device that has a keyboard, a mouse, and a display connected to your remote desktop. So the number of places you now have to secure are a lot less. So really the only secure channel between my Mac and my virtual desktop when I'm at home is PC over IP, which is an encrypted 256-bit AES encrypted stream.
Yep.
Right? Or if I'm using RDP over HTTPS, I can use even larger encryption streams. And because I can apply group policies at the VMs and say no USB devices can be plugged in, or only using DLP, only these type of devices can be plugged in. I don't have to worry about, and I can turn off mapping of my local drive to my virtual system. I don't have to worry about bad stuff migrating off of a fully malware-infested home PC that my 15-year-old has. Migrating up into the virtual environment. Whereas with VPNs, it's, I'm just going to log in with the VPN and all bets are off.
You had on your machine,
Right? Yeah. So the only network connection from my Mac or my laptop or my home PC is just a display connection. And I've limited all of the quasi-physical connections around USB. There's less to worry about. It's not to say that it's free and clear and everyone go. But you've really narrowed down that window of vulnerability.
Okay. So last question, and this is sort of a futures thing, and not sure if you're kind of. So we talked a bunch about sort of emulating legacy applications or Windows applications, and we talked about VDI on an end device. What's the thinking? Not so much I'm not looking for roadmaps. Like what's the general thinking in the security community where you say, well, what happens when I stop doing VDI and I'm just using like a native iPad app or a native Android app, but the company says, hey, that's the device you like, or a doctor says this is the device I like. Is the same type of security going to apply to that, or is it radically going to change, or have people started thinking, even not really thinking about that yet?
Well, yeah. Do I write a native app on the endpoint? Or do I leverage VDI type of capabilities? Boy, I think you're going to see a measure of both. And what you're going to see from a security standpoint is maybe I really don't want to have anything on that iPad. Like, for example, last year I talked to a customer, 11,000 potential seats. 7,000 of those were going to be road warriors who go out and talk with Joe Public about
whatever
their stuff. And they wanted to get away from them carrying around laptops with sensitive data. They're going into mom and pop's house and they're typing in all sorts of different bits of personal information. They said, can we use an iPad and just connect it to a VDI session back in the data center? So that if the iPad is lost, well, just go to the Apple store and go get another one. And expense it. So it's going to be interesting. What's really going to be interesting is what is Microsoft going to do about this? Are they going to start writing applications that run on Windows, but when they're displayed onto a pad, they use the native touch and feel, even though they're actually hosted remotely. And this kind of brings into, where are things going with VMware's App Blast.
Where it's like native HTML5.
Where I just
like HTML5.
I just click on a link on an application on my iPad, and next thing you know, Microsoft Excel comes out. And it's not Microsoft Excel running on the iPad. It's Microsoft Excel running on my VDI session back over the link. Now I don't have to push down as much information, and and the whole technology cycle starts over again. Of like, now I've got a new device, a new sort of user experience. The apps will catch up, and then security will have to catch up. And, you know what it is this industry really goes in cycles. So we had a cycle of, everything was centralized into the mainframe. Then everything was expanded out with the mini computer age. which was then further expanded out with the PC.
Right.
And guess what? We're now moving all back to centralized compute. And you're seeing this with cloud.
Yeah,
we had to
exactly.
mention cloud somewhere in this conversation. You're seeing that with cloud, where everything's migrating back into data centers, and I'm just accessing things over a lightweight connection.
Right. Well, very cool. Well, Mike, as always, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're out of time for today. So, folks, you can follow us on Twitter at thecloudcast.net, or, of course, reach us on the web, where we'll have both the podcast and the whiteboard video posted. You can send us email. We'll have links to the show. We'll have links to Mike's blog and his Twitter feed. One last thing. Where can folks find you over the next, couple months at trade shows or events if they just want to sit down and talk technology and VDI with
so
you?
I'll be at VMware PEX next week,
Cool.
flying out Sunday. I'll be there all week. I'll be in the EMC booth if you want to find me.
Okay.
You can find me on Twitter at Mike Foley, Foley. You can find me at my blog, YELOF, which is Foley spelled backwards.com. And I'll be home for a week, and then I'm off at the RSA conference out in San Francisco for a week. And then the first week of April, I will be at the InfoSec conference down in Orlando.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, everybody, for listening, and have a great week.